Did the infra meeting happen today?
Hi, Brian. It looks like the infra meeting is happening in about 12 minutes.
Oh, okay, great.
It was a time zone skew. The Pacific time was correct, but the UTC
Okay.
moved.
Well, I'm glad I made it.
Good to meet you. My first time on this call. I'm at Equinix.
Good to meet you too. I'm pretty new around here, but I guess maybe it's like 6 months by now. I still don't know anything.
See you in about 9 minutes. I think you're muted, Ben.
Hi all.
Hello.
So I'm taking host today last minute because Arno is stuck in a cab and gonna be a bit late. But he may be able to join us later in this meeting. We'll give it another minute for folks to show up. So it's looking pretty packed. Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to SIG K8s Infra. This is the Wednesday, November 9th meeting. This meeting is under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. Essentially, be excellent to each other. Keep that in mind. This meeting will be recorded and posted to YouTube later. I'm Benjamin Elder. I'm not one of the chairs or leads, but I'm stepping in today at the last minute because our leads are unavailable to make it. Hopefully Arno will join us later. So thanks everyone for showing up. Please put your attendance in the agenda doc if you can. And do we have anybody that could take notes? Thank you, Jeremy. And I'm going to figure out screen sharing the data studio report here is our standing first item. So let's see. Hold up. Zoom's struggling a little bit here. They're all Chrome unknown, and I don't know which is which.
Hey.
I'm gonna. Hello, Rian. Would you be prepared to share the data studio report? I'll make you co-host.
All right. I can just find a screen for that.
Here we go. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties with the screen share.
No worries. Give me a moment. Also just need to go to get the report open.
And this is linked in the agenda doc, but we'll also post it in the chat. If you are a member of the SIG K8s Infra mailing list, you can see this report. The mailing list is open to join, but for auth reasons or whatever, we tend to have things shared with the list. And the mailing list is linked at the top of the document under SIG K8s Infra info.
Just waiting for the report to load. Seems to be slow.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, I don't know what's going on my end, but when I try to share a window from Zoom, none of them have a title, and I have a lot of Chrome windows, and some of them I can't share. So, well,
Yeah. Zoom share seemed to, okay, there it's now, because I had the report open, the desktop doesn't want to show it.
There
All
we go.
right, you
Thank
should
you.
be seeing a billing report.
We can see
you
it.
drive, I'll click.
So this is our spend over the last 28 days. So the past month or so. As you see, it's quite high. We're exceeding our budget quite a bit still. And we'll be okay this year because we have a $600,000 additional injection from Google recently. But this is of concern for the future.
Can we also make sure just everyone, we need a thank you for Google for bailing us out on this one. I don't think we've sung the praises enough, but Google really bailed us out of a rough situation there.
Yep.
Yep, thank you, Google. That's right.
Yeah, a couple of us have been in a lot of fun meetings. It's exciting, but I'm glad we should be good through the end of the year. And I don't think there's anything public yet, but just kind of like a heads up, we're also discussing if we can get a little bit more to make sure that we have a bit more overhead going through the rest of the year, so we don't have any surprises at the end of the year. At the moment, I looked at this yesterday. I estimate we had about 59 days of our current spend rate, and we had 53 days left in the year. So there's a ongoing escalation to see if we can put a little bit more on this year at least, so that we can be committed through making it through the end of the year without a problem and kind of reset going into next year.
Any specific, I'll just page through that and stop me if there's anything specific.
Sure. Yeah, we have a couple of these pages like this cloud build breakdown, which are good to keep an eye on, but as you can see, they're a pretty small part of our spend in actuality. So I think this is probably the main page to look at. So I think we have a few new folks here this time. We'll go over this a little bit. So K8s Artifacts Prod is the main place where we host content. There are also places that are still built inside of google.com instead of the Kubernetes.io GCP account, which are directly to Google on a different budget. But for the things that are running under the community, which is on this budget, directly controlled under like totally community managed infrastructure instead of some sort of like granted access or something. The biggest cost you'll see here is K8s Artifacts Prod. And the main thing that's doing is hosting the container images at k8s.gcr.io. The cloud storage cost for that is primarily those container images. A very small amount of that cost is backing storage for artifacts.k8s.io, which is an endpoint that is an experimental, more cost-efficient binary hosting. And that has KOps and some old CryCuddle binaries. So it's primarily KOps users. The main cost you'll see from that is item 2 here, networking, because that bucket is fronted by Google Cloud CDN. So the egress traffic is billed as under GCP networking instead of GCP storage. So you can see that that's also quite an expensive item that we're looking at migrating. Proud Build is the main CI cluster running on the community. So that's where we schedule CI tasks as pods in a Kubernetes cluster. Artifact Registry is a newer item. We are migrating to Artifact Registry as part of backing registry.k8s.io. So we should see that spend go up and the cloud storage spend go down, which we're seeing here. And item number 5 is the 5K node scale testing. SIG Scale does 5,000 node scale tests periodically. So as you can see, this is still not a terribly large percentage of the budget, but one of the few remaining notable items. Most things beyond that are much smaller, but add up collectively. You'll see that the others is, and the pie graph is a relatively large part of the chart, and a pretty good chunk of that is sort of miscellaneous CI costs. We have a large pool of GCP projects that we use to isolate testing, and we rent and then auto clean up the resources in. So a good bit of that is you can see a bunch of these projects on further pages that each individually have small charges, but kind of collectively add up for running all sorts of different like end-to-end testing. Any questions about this page?
Not a question, but it's interesting to see 1,037 items that are mostly in that other bucket.
Yes, there's about 11K of spend there. If we hover those, it'll tell us the percentages. You can see that just the artifact hosting is like easily the largest slice. That's that purple slice there. But these other things do add up a bit. And we do have some room to move them to other vendors as we get credits. In some cases, we mostly don't have a lot of room to just make them more cost efficient. We already do things like automatically ensuring that any leaked end-to-end test resources are cleaned up by CI, or the community runs CI auto scales with the workloads. So
Does the cloud storage slice of the pie does it include egress charges for that? I guess I'm not super clear on
so
where those live.
So item number not on the pie chart, though it is part of the pie chart is by project, which might be a little confusing. The project and service list item number 1, that includes the actual storage and also the egress. Storage would not be anywhere near this large. The total size of the container images, when I checked early this year, was around 1 terabyte of storage, if I remember correctly. So storing that actually does not cost very much, but the egress charges for Google Container Registry show up primarily as under the cloud storage service. The networking charge that you see under number 2 is some different storage, not the container images, where there's a Google Cloud CDN in front, doing some caching and globalization, and that shows up as a networking charge. And the storage charge you would see from that would just be the storage operations and the actual like disk space, which is a very small fraction. We have a relatively reasonably sized data set, but we serve it to the world all day.
Right.
And in particularly from admittedly one of the smaller clouds to the others. So we get a lot of egress charge.
I tried to look for some SKUs underneath the K8s Artifacts prod cloud storage to try to identify the egress charges versus the storage. And I wasn't able to find an easy way to get the report to do that, but it might be useful if someone's got deeper SKU knowledge to pull that out at some point.
Yeah, we have other user interfaces we can use to look at more of this, but for the like dynamic, like really public available data studio report, we don't have that, but I can assure you that it's primarily the egress charge. Similarly, we'll see that for item number 4, artifact registry, that is us moving from Google Container Registry to Artifact Registry as we move from K8s.gcr.io to registry.k8s.io, where the primary backing store there has been moved to regional artifact registry instances instead of multi-regional Google Container Registry. So that is also largely egress cost, but because there's not that much traffic on it yet, it is not quite as dominated by egress yet. Some of that is actually the storage cost of storing the data set in all the regions. But the percentage of that is storage should plummet as we move traffic.
You mentioned that would start to grow in cost. How much, let's say everything is moved to the new regional artifact registry, how much do you expect that to impact the actual bottom line of total spend?
So the total spend should go down because we don't serve traffic directly to artifact registry. We have an application in front, and from a past verbal agreement with Amazon prior to the 3 million announcement, we are sending traffic from Amazon IP addresses to Amazon cloud storage for layers, which is the bulk of the egress. And the percentage of requests coming from AWS on the old infrastructure was greater than 50%. So we should expect a pretty substantial cost drop overall.
Cool.
The infrastructure in front also costs non-zero, but it's relatively cheap because it is a small serverless application that just looks at incoming requests and identifies which provider it's coming from and offloads, forwards a redirect. So
You just reroute them somewhere else.
So we're just
and that
serving
traffic stays inside the provider at that point.
yeah, so we're only serving redirects there. So the actually half of the cost of Hippie, we can see your Mattermost there, or Rion. Most of the cost of running that service, like half of it is actually the logging at the moment, which we're going to turn down now that we're more confident in the stability of it. We're paying about as much to store the logs from that infrastructure as we are to run it.
Do we know from the aggregate traffic how many megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes of traffic there is per unit time? Is that
I know we've looked
collected
at
in
it. I don't think we have that readily available. When was the registry implemented? Well, the registry has been implemented over the course of this year, but that's not tied to when the traffic moves over. So we made it the default in Kubernetes 1.25, but I believe some of the release announcements still point at the old one, and it's still possible to pull from the old infrastructure. It's kind of a complicated question, like when will the traffic shift? And it's something the project is still working on. But it would have started, most of what we would have started seeing would have been around August, when it started becoming more broadly finally being used as default in more places in the project, notably Kubernetes 1.25 release. It's somewhere we have some data on the like actual traffic numbers, but I don't think anybody has that handy right now. So we have a couple more pages in the report we should probably take a quick look at. And also, if any of you join the mailing list, you can access the report, and these pages are actually dynamic. You can filter on the services or change the dates to help see how these things change over time. Let's go to the next page, Rion. So this page can be a bit misleading because traffic does just sort of have patterns over time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that this is definitely the month over month trend, but it does give some idea that, as you would expect, artifact registry costs are way up, and cloud storage costs that were from GCR are going down. That doesn't mean our net cost is necessarily shifted much. They should be pretty similar. We expect artifact registry to be a bit cheaper at scale because we also took the opportunity to move towards regionalizing ourselves instead of paying for an October cloud storage pricing change to reflect the cost of replicating for multi-regional storage. But we know when we're adding new content, and we already have a system that promotes from staging to production storage. So we are now copying to end locations ourselves, and then the redirect service is handling the regionalizing. So we hope that the traffic that does still go back to Google Cloud will cost less as it moves between these, but it's a bit premature to say yet. And you can see that also, for example, K8s Infra Pro build trusted, that is a smaller CI cluster that's restricted access. What workloads are there that handles some critical automation for the project? So that going down probably isn't a particular thing that we've done. It's just trends in the real usage of the project fluctuating. Like, for example, the main build cluster has gone up 56.1% before the previous month. that's typically just because of where we are at in the release cycle, with people heavily testing pull requests leading up to code freeze, as opposed to anything the project has like intentionally done to shift costs around or to increase usage. Let's see the other 2 pages. So we have a lot of other cloud storage buckets used for things like logs in the CI or intermediate storage locations before being promoted to the production serving. So that's what essentially all of these are here. You can see they're generally pretty small charges. The ones that are the most active staging locations, like K8s release, where we stage binaries that are going to be released, can be a little bit larger, but not substantive in comparison to K8s artifact prod, where that's the container image serving. But we do keep an eye on those trends. And the last page. Yes, there's like total cost tracking at the bottom of the graph. And this gives some idea of like where he has gone year to date. So you can see, believe we estimated we're on track to 1.8 million again for the container image hosting, and just on GCR, not including artifact registry. And you can see that over the course of the year, the scale testing does cost more than the just the part that runs the CI, but that's not all of the CI, because it's just the place where we execute tasks. Most of those tasks are going to turn around and spin up an ephemeral cluster from source code. And those costs are spread over many projects because we have the CI rent projects, and then we have a tool go through and delete everything in the project after the project cycles out of being rented. So it gets spread over many projects so that we can ensure that we're making sure we clean everything up so we don't leak resources. Okay, so I'm going to say let's move to our agenda items. Looks like Hippie's up first with cube cost. Hippie, you're muted.
Just trying to pull up that report around the cost, and it's a private report, but it takes a bit to load because there's a lot of BigQuery data underneath. Oh, sorry, are we going straight to kube cost? All right, I can't hear you.
Sorry, yes, you're the first item on the agenda, Hippie.
Beautiful. I'll be real quick about that. I got to spend some time with Matt Ray from KubeCost while at KubeCon, and they have a product that allows us to spin upside. We deploy it inside of our clusters. We're actually able to get the cost per job if we want to start to sort the jobs that we want to bring over from a cost perspective. They've offered a license to help aggregate that, and I'm looking forward to trying to get a commitment around actually helping to implement that. But he got COVID while at KubeCon, and it's been out of pocket and is in recovery mode. So I'm looking forward to that. But I think as far as giving us deeper visibility into the job level stuff, this is the best thing I've seen so far. And that was because I think Caleb, Mohammed, and I all looked at how do we get some more data on our cost spend.
Cool. Thank you, Hippie. So should we implement here, or should we come back? Or I see Arnaud has a hand up. Hi, Arnaud.
Hey, hi. Sorry for being late. I think there's value to use KubeCost specifically for EKS because I think recently GK and mostly GCP released the same feature close to what KubeCost is doing. We just don't use it that at the moment. So I think we can keep that option once we get the credit from AWS and we start moving jobs over EKS cluster. Because from the data sheet I saw, on the website, there's a better integration with EKS than GKE from what I read. So I didn't have time to explore that, but I feel like we should keep that option specifically for EKS first and see what's happening. And when we start with AWS, we can extend usage of kubectl to GKE.
I have a question. Are we currently crunching the information that we gather from the usage metering for the current GK clusters?
Not at the moment, because that's going to trigger cost, BigQuery cost. And we don't want to. I think because there's a chance we're going to be over budget next year. We don't want to introduce new cost.
Okay, so in that case, keep cost is definitely another plus there as well, because we can give them the job of crunching that cost instead of doing it ourselves.
Yeah, so I think if with kubectl we can store that information elsewhere than GCP, I'm fine with that.
It's worth pointing out that typically the larger cost to CI is the end-to-end tests. And for the things that aren't end-to-end tests, we hopefully know that as soon as we can get an EKS cluster up in the CI, like there shouldn't be any problem to move that spend over. And in general, our CI spend has, like, we can look in aggregate and see that it hasn't been out of control. But we know that distribution costs have spiraled, not just on the community budget, but also on the internally build things that we hope to migrate. And for the CI component that still runs internally, I can tell you that by far the biggest cost is because the project hasn't invested in being able to auto scale that yet. It is artificially expensive, though that's not on the community bills, so it's not an immediate pressing concern. But when we go to move it, we can do the same thing that we did for jobs that we moved previously, where the CI enforces that you must set requests and limits on jobs running in the community clusters. So as they're gradually migrated, we put them into a state where we will be able to auto scale the CI, and that will make a pretty large cost improvement. And if we didn't have the distribution costs, we could actually already move all of the remaining infrastructure from internal to GCP with plenty of overhead without making that optimization. So just a bit of context.
Yeah, and we can also basically, once we have the AWS credit, we can move all the unit tests to EKS, and that's going to save a lot of money. And basically, and on EKS, we can have kubectl, and that basically help us really identify what's cost the most, because we move and we might get better instance on AWS, so build can be faster than currently. That's why I'm saying kubectl is a good option, because if we get EKS, we deploy kubectl there, and we can identify what costs the most.
Absolutely. Also, the jobs that will be most easily migrated to a non-GCP cluster will be the ones that do not use external resources heavily, build, unit test, and so on. So the cube cost should give us the actual cost of those jobs, which will be nice, as opposed to in the current cluster, where for a lot of them, a lot of jobs will look cheap when they're actually quite expensive.
A note on using an emission webhook to enforce resource limits. I'm actually going through this at my day job right now, and there is a shocking number of charts and things in the world that don't give you the option to set things, or there's init containers that don't have resource limits or not. And so I am perhaps going to back away from trying to enforce it all with an emission web controller and actually just modify the resources. So instead of saying thou shalt do it, I'm going to give you a crappy default, and if you care, you can then do something about it.
So we have a configuration layer for the CI ourselves, and we have a unit test when you try to alter the CI configuration that says if you are scheduling to this cluster, you must set limits and requests yourself. We don't do it with a webhook.
Okay, well, if you're already gating it, then that's a better situation than I'm in, where I'm trying to get to the
Yes.
point where I could start enforcing the policy, which is just madness.
Yeah, we have them in policy enforced, but we have been using the pivot point of moving the community cluster where we're much more concerned about the spend and to kind of have a point where someone is paying attention to this job, so they have a reason. Okay, you're modifying this job. In order to do this modification, you must figure out setting this, as opposed to getting people to set it for all of the rest of the jobs is a ton of work and unclear benefit for the community because that isn't publicly billed anyhow. And even as a person working inside of Google, I can't see that bill. I have to ask nicely. So
EP, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, is so as we're moving those tests to EKS, is this something we can put clusters and Boscos for and then have it checked out as we add new providers and new clusters?
I think it's possible because that's what K8s is doing right now. They have a Bosco. They have basically have Boscos deployed on AWS using a pool of AWS accounts. So it's possible for some E3 tests, but some of basically most of the E3 tests for the KK repo are opened by GCP. So that's a different conversation.
It's the wrong layer. We lease AWS like sub accounts in Boscos for doing end-to-end testing, and that's a whole other discussion how we're going to move that. For moving things like unit test and build, currently in Prout you have to explicitly configure which cluster they're on, but in this case that should be relatively fine because we can easily identify which jobs are readily moved and just leave the ones that aren't, and the ones that aren't are a lot of them, because of the end-to-end testing part where we rely on barely maintained tooling in the Kubernetes repo that can spin up a cluster from source. And that's honestly, sorting that out could be its own meeting.
We could, but could we, instead of it, we could change how that works on where it gets scheduled to a pool of clusters, right? And then do something like Boscos to check them out. I'm just trying to get to the position where we're not front loading a bunch of stuff onto one environment and in the hope that we get more sponsorships and more companies giving us credits for things that they could just automatically start load balancing.
I think that we need to have a bigger question about how we do CI.
I mean, it's possible. I don't actually think it's very necessary. Hopefully we'll have good visibility into where the cost is going, and we already know at the moment we have two vendors and too much on one of them, and we know which things we can afford to move and which things we can't. Yeah, this is really more of a question for SIG testing, but I have enough familiarity to say that like I think that would be a fairly complex endeavor for relatively limited wind in the short term, but it's certainly an interesting thing that we've started discussing for the long term to have some kind of way to schedule across different clusters automatically.
I have my hand raised, so I'm going to speak. Just to answer to Eddie, I think we can keep that option for sub project, like give the possibility to bootstrap E2E tests on AWS exclusively, because basically we say we are open about E2E tests for the Kubernetes project, but for the sub project like cluster API, I don't know. I saw different sub project in SIG scheduling, stuff like that. We can try to improve the definition of the E2E test and be multi-cloud. But we need a bigger conversation about how we do CI at the project level.
Yeah, I could go into a lot more depth on that. I'm not sure I want to derail too much, but I'll point out that we actually did have CI on multiple clouds in the past, and we don't really today because the bill lapsed for a while and we had to remove K8s from Kubernetes pre-submit. And since then, we haven't had another tool actually keeping up with the absolute latest Kubernetes source code changes confidently. Having gotten kind into pre-submit, that was about a year-long endeavor of convincing people and patching anything that came up. The staffing for that is going to look a bit different from moving the infrastructure, but for things like build and unit test, it's going to be glaringly obvious to some of us that those things can be moved. And since we are at 120% of the GCP budget right now, we will want to move them to wherever is available, and it will be fine if that's a fixed config for the next year, probably. We have at least 3 other items, and we're more than halfway in. I feel like maybe we should see the AWS dashboard demo.
Okay, just give me a second. Let's see. Okay, all right. I'm gonna start from here. Okay, so let's see. So this is an Amazon account. It's what we call a management account that hosts all the accounts, and in here there's information about the billing and what it costs. I'm just using one from work where we use for testing and stuff. So Amazon has some interesting cost reports. So very basic. If you go here, as you can already see, like you need to have access to the accounts to log in and take a look and see what things are costing, right? So what Amazon has done is they allow you to export this somewhere and run some big data analytics on them. So what I did was I exported this data to Athena, which is Amazon's equivalent of BigQuery. And what we can do is we can use third-party products to then connect to Amazon and present that data, right? So this is what I've done in Grafana. So if I go here real quick. So one of the reasons why I suggest we do something like this is that this is like public application. You can go in here and log in and take a look, similar to the current Grafana instances that we have that are very old that need to be upgraded at some point. And the Kubernetes pod that's running this only needs access to AWS. The other people don't. So if I get a table up and running, 1 second. I have quite a number of tables. Just give me a second. So yeah, you can easily get figures of what this account has been spending on AWS, for example, along with the cost of service, and what things were costing last month. You can also run random queries yourself and create dashboards of things that you're after. So this here is, so if I do this real quick, sorry, just give me a second. My computer is stuck. If I go here, you can kind of see the underlying query that's been run to get that data up and running. So you could go in there and work out the kind of information that you're after and then graph it on Grafana and then share with everybody else like we do with Data Studio today. So this is billing information that's pulled out of Athena. The other thing we can do is we can go to CloudWatch and pull information. Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I feel like you should continue on the demo. I was when you get to a break.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so Athena is great for pulling billing data. It runs every hour, so we've got the latest set of information that Amazon pulls. There's all sort of information that you can pull. It's a complex data set. So that's the billing piece, right? The other piece is information about what's happening with infrastructure on AWS. So if I go down here, S3, for example, so we can get some information about buckets, right? So I need to pick the region. So where is it? So, yep. I'm gonna select this bucket because it's a bit busier. Yeah, so here you can see information about this bucket. It's got this many objects and it's this big. And then you can also get information about how busy is the bucket, what's happening in there, who's writing, who's reading, and some of the metrics. So this is the kind of information we want to collect about. We want to be able to see about the buckets that we already have today in there that are serving AWS customers. We can also use the same thing to get information about EKS clusters when we spin them up in the future. And yeah, and that's it really.
That's really cool. My only question is there a managed service equivalent to this? Like, I love open source and everything, but also, as you noted, that our current Grafana instances are actually out of date. And
there is managed Grafana.
Okay.
Offered by Amazon directly.
Like, I'm not sure what's
can
this
use.
option, but it's kind of nice that, for example, the Data Studio report doesn't really require active maintenance, as we've had a lot to run. But regardless, I mean, this seems quite awesome. I'm just curious if there's a reason that, like, one of them, like something similar to Data Studio where we don't have to run it.
Yeah, there is managed Grafana from AWS. You can get AWS to run Grafana for you. And we can get it to show information from Amazon products, or anything else that you can pull information from. Like if you go here,
I think that answers that question. Then we can
Yeah.
always just consider using a managed Grafana then, and if that makes sense. For
Yeah,
us.
we should probably use that opportunity to even replace the existing one that we've got. I think that was V6, and with all sort of Prometheus information that is pulling from. I kind of did the same thing for Knative a while back, where the Grafana instance runs on our Kubernetes cluster, but it's more modern, much easier to deploy, and it's using managed Prometheus for the metrics. But that's a SIG testing story, not one here.
Yeah, I'm aware that those felt quite out of date. Thank you. This is really cool.
Yeah, so it's very straightforward to do. There's some configuration that Caleb has to do in AWS to make it work. Once he's done it, and let's say we go with managed Grafana, so you'll have to spin that up, make it public or tie it to GitHub login for members of the organization to be able to log in and just read access to everything, and just go with that.
Yeah, I mean, if we can do GitHub login, that sounds like a pretty good choice, just so we
It's
can
easy,
avoid like.
straightforward. That's what I've done for the Knative instance. Everybody can read it, and the public just don't get access to it because they don't need to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want people being able to see our data, but like if we can grant org members permission to like query and stuff, so we can let people do
you
what they
can do
want to
that.
avoid abuse.
That's
That
very
sounds
easy.
very nice.
Yeah, so that should be very easy to set up. So yeah, I think it's kind of easy. There's enough details in there for Caleb to get started and deploy stuff. And yeah, that's it from me.
Let's go.
Okay, Caleb, I just made you co-host for when we're ready to show yours, but does anyone have any further comments about Mohammed's demo?
I thought that was great. I think there's probably some value trying to get both GCP and AWS into the same dashboard to try and like just even be able to get the aggregate numbers on things. I think that would be useful. And I'm saying this as someone who has been meaning to do this for my day job for forever and haven't done it. So, but yeah, I think it should be an exciting thing to say, to be able to go to one dashboard and just say, okay, well, this is our total spend for the month of December. And then you could drill down into whichever the backend services are.
Yeah, you can crunch big data, sort of BigQuery data sets on Grafana as well. So we just need to set that up as well. But we'd have to throw out our dashboards and make them from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, I get it.
But
I
it'll be
mean, you
worth
could
it.
also, I mean, you could just dump all the data. I mean, it doesn't have to be you have multiple data sources. You could just move everything into the same backend. I mean, that may be even more work in the short term, but in the long term, if you just pick one and say Grafana is going to be the front end, and we're going to use one data source, and we're just going to massage all of the cloud billing data from various providers into the same data source.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting follow-up topic. In the fullness of time for this meeting, Caleb, do you want to start your demo? You should have co-host now.
Apparently I need to tell the system that Zoom is allowed to see my windows. So I might need to rejoin, but to maybe not do that now, is it possible that I'll drop the link in any case. Let me just bring that one up. Is it possible for someone else to share their screen just this one time? It will, the problem will be resolved without needing to reconnect next time. But there's a link.
Since I had trouble with that earlier, Mohammed, do you want to?
Or anybody else?
What do you want me to share?
I've just dropped a link in the chat right there.
Okay.
So,
All right. Bring it up on the screen.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So this is something that I built a few months ago, but it's definitely not as, it doesn't have the cool factor and the same data that was pulled in from what Mohammed just showed us. But what this would provide as like an alternate solution would be cost data from aggregated across all of the sub accounts in an AWS account and all the other ones in the organization, which would then filter down to Kubernetes ones, and cost data per service in all of those accounts. And then it won't have anything related to S3 usage or anything, but it would, what this will do is pull data from Cost Explorer, and then it will export it into a GCS bucket and then create a BigQuery data set out of it that you can then pull into your Data Studio report. So this might be a slightly more integrated approach from how we do the cost report and usage analysis. But yeah, like if you scroll down a bit, you'll see the goal operation sections. Feel free to take a look at that. Yeah, just presenting another thing that might be useful in the tool chain.
Cool. Thank you. Maybe you and Mohammed can have a follow-up conversation about getting these things deployed. This seems like something like this space is something that we're going to sorely need going into next year in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Caleb.
Okay. Ed, you want to talk about Equinix?
Sure. So by way of introduction, I'm Ed Vilmetti, work at Equinix, previously at Packet, which was acquired by Equinix. We have had for a long time support of a number of CNCF projects through the Community Infrastructure Lab, as well as other projects, Linux Foundation projects and others that are using the Equinix Metal infrastructure to support their efforts. And I'm interested in trying to figure out both on my side what sort of a budget we could apply to supporting this Kubernetes effort, but also from a technical side, try to figure out, well, if you're going to do it, like what stuff would you run and who would run it, et cetera. So I want to sort of lead by way of comparison of some other systems that people are running on our infrastructure. There's a link in the document of a case study from the folks doing NTP Pool, which is a global distributed time distribution network. Ask Bjorn Hansen is lead on that. Another pretty good sized one that I just looked at was providing some infrastructure for a number of operating systems that are doing CDN type activities. We support the CentOS pool. We support FreeBSD with a server in Europe and some others. And then there are also projects that are doing CI/CD through our infrastructure. So it's a pretty broad mix of things. The Equinix Metal service, as you may know, but I'm not going to guess that you know, is a cloud deployable service in the sense that there's an API and cloud providers for it and whatnot. You can provision things with Terraform, that sort of thing. But it's a bare metal service and not a managed service. We have a variety of configurations and a couple dozen data centers around the world with gear. That's been used by these projects that I've mentioned to build up their own CDNs or build infrastructure. The division of labor is that we provide the machines and the data centers and the heating and the cooling and the power and the network, but the project itself is responsible for the entire software stack and the operation of it. So it's not the classic sort of managed service that a lot of other cloud things provide. The other piece, which I don't actually know quite as much about, but given the cost of just distribution and egress in this network, there's a product called Equinix Fabric, which is a system-to-system interconnect product or system to cloud, which provides a cost-effective way of getting bandwidth from here to there. And that might be a component of some other solution that would tackle directly some of the bandwidth costs and egress charges that are currently, absorbing in one way or another a lot of the budget for the system. I have a lot more control over spend on the Equinix Metal side than I do on the spend of the Equinix Fabric side. Like, I know how to get things approved for Metal. This would be like project number one for Fabric. But I'm really interested in sorting out like what kind of infrastructure can the project absorb? Does it help to give you a server, right, with bandwidth or not, right? It might not. Where strategically in the architecture as it currently stands or might stand in the future that we could step in with some amount of either metal or bit moving to help things along. So happy to take any questions, happy to go into more detail with any of the existing stuff that we've done to give you a sense for what's possible, but I think there's something there. I just don't know exactly what it is yet.
So we only have a few minutes left. What's the best way for us to follow up with you?
I think the best way is like we should just have a different meeting, a dedicated meeting to it, like how Equinix can donate resources through CNCF to the project. I think that's the follow-up we should do, because I think the first thing we need to clarify is basically what we can get in terms of resources. Like, can I spend 1 million of bare metal instance a year? I mean, I take a random number. I think that's like the first thing we need to discuss stuff. And from that, we can have a conversation about what we can use, because we already know how we can leverage Equinix. We currently have Equinix instance we use for basically from the container registry, but there's like a fear of overspending and blow up the existing project. So I think the follow-up that trying to have a different conversation about how we can define the I would say the budget allow to the project.
Yeah, I'd love to set up a separate meeting.
Yeah.
You can coordinate through the Slack channel and figure out a time that might be good for a subset of folks who would know and care. I guess from a budget perspective, I'd like to sort of figure out what the network architecture and system architecture might be. I know from other systems that we've put together that in these sorts of distribution networks, bandwidth costs overwhelm the metal costs. So that was part of my probing questions about like how many petabytes per second are you sending or what have you.
Kind of at a catch-22. How much can you give us? And the actually is how much do you need? What are we actually spending in parts of distribution costs and getting things egressing? And if we architect a solution, what would that look like?
Yeah, and I can sort of point to other perhaps similar sized things that I can say, well, something like this costs this much over the past year.
It'd
with that,
be lovely to get some information from the kernel.org people. They're probably the closest, being under the LF and
Yep.
also having similar infrastructure problems for distributing things globally. Would be a good, who's been down this road before conversation.
Yeah, Constantine has been lead on that, and if we can even perhaps loop him in on things directly, get a sense for how he's doing stuff.
Okay,
Thank
I will ping you on
Chad.
Slack. I will ping you on Slack about this, and we can follow up.
Yeah, I also have some thoughts about how we can use this in some of the infrastructure we're building for content distribution. So happy to help join any chats about that.
Super. Okay. Yeah, I'll look in Slack for some coordination, and we can get together a subgroup and do something.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes left now. Thanks everyone for coming today. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Like one last question. Can I confirm that with all the time zone changes that this meeting is regularly 4 p.m. Pacific and now 2100 UTC instead of 2000 UTC because we're back in synchronized time zone land?
It's always the 20 p.m. UTC and 4 p.m. Eastern time. Always is never really changed regardless of the time zone. As far as I know, we never changed that.
Well, except that the meeting today started at 2100, not 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, the Kubernetes project tends to have the meeting scheduled through a Google Calendar in a US time zone, unfortunately, and it's something that probably ought to be revisited, but it is the current state of, I believe, all of the sub-project meetings.
Mysterians would also love for it to stick to GMT.
Yeah,
I'm not going to make an opinion on GMT versus US. But I just need to know which so I can go on my calendar.
it should be US because of because it's really involved, but that's definitely a broader topic that should be revisited.
Okay.
I live in a US time zone that doesn't do DST, so you could if we just change them all to US Arizona time, I'd be very happy.
I think we actually have some like guidance in the docs for the community site to make sure that you link it so that these will get converted from like Pacific time zone because of this kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that's what we should be doing, but it is what we're doing currently in all the subprojects that I'm aware of. So
it imported for me as Pacific time, which is fine. It just means that it just changed, right? Because of the DST transition. So it changed where it is in my day.
Yes, but I mean, there's a trade-off in who it's changing for, and I don't think it was a conscious decision. It's just how things have been. Well, thank you all. Thanks for coming. enjoy the rest of your day. Hope to see some folks around again in the future.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
bye.
you, everybody. Bye.